Hello, and welcome to the Gaia update for Venus in Taurus from March 6th to April 3rd, 2020. I'm Adrienne Elise. So so much going on for March of 2020, and Venus in Taurus, at home in Taurus, is a very important piece of the puzzle to examine. Venus coming home in Taurus happens every year, but this year, because we are completing this Mercury retrograde that's had 3 passes over the Aquarius-Pisces cusp, is speaking about moving into the Aquarian age and the changes that need to happen for us to be able to do that. So the energy of this Venus in Taurus for 2020, March 2020, is about coming home to the earth. And this is about very specific type of souls, this type of souls that are drawn to this work, who are not quite, although they have a deep love and dedication and devotion to this earth, might not be completely feeling at home here. This is for a myriad of reasons that we're going to explore here together. But there is a mounting evidence that in this time, in this season, this month, maybe it's time to come home to the earth in a deeper and more complete way. So these souls don't feel at home on the earth often because of past life targeting. These very advanced souls have come from higher dimensional energies, gone through a whole bunch to squeeze themselves into this lower dimensional reality and bring their light and healing. And I can't even describe what's been shown to me about what these souls have had to go through to get here and to be here in this evolution, incarnating at the darkest times, particularly in this past Piscean age, dealing with trauma, persecution, and being rejected from the earth for their light and their love. And still, they persist. So huge messages here coming in around gratitude and thanks from the earth, from the highest masters, from the highest beings supporting this evolution. Thank you for going all through all you've had to go through to persist in being here right now. And this is an interesting thing. Many of these souls that I work with are like, okay, once they start to wake up into the greater spiritual truth, into the fact that this isn't all there is, into the greater, bigger self of who they are, they're kind of like, what am I doing here? Get me out of this place. It's like a torture chamber, right? And this is part of, it's kind of like a place we go on the journey. And yet the message that comes through around that is like, yeah, well, maybe that's true. And that's an experience that you have. And yet to complete why you're here. See, this is the deal, is that these souls have, in order to come here, there's like a huge karmic desire. Otherwise you would not be here. And in order to release yourself from this lower dimensional reality and this trauma plane, you've got to fully arrive first. And that's the energy of Venus at home in Taurus in March of 2020. And so how do we fully arrive? And what's kept us from being here? And this is part of the thing that I'm seeing again and again, these souls trying to come home. It's almost like there's been a placeholder there. Now, part of this has to do with the fact that when you incarnated into this lifetime, and perhaps for a series of past lives, the earth energies couldn't host you in the bigger truth of who you are. And this also means that you might not know who you are in the bigger truth of who you are. So it's like you're floundering around here, part in, part out. You don't know who you are. You can't get in touch with your gifts and skills. This is a lot of the energy of Venus at home in Taurus, because it's about self-worth and our inner gifts and our ability to receive from the universe and receive who we really are. And so for these particular souls, powerful messages about it's time to come home. It's time to receive who you are. It's time to uncover your gifts and skills. So it's almost like there's just this placeholder in your field holding this place while the bigger part of you kind of swirls around and tries to land. And so how can you recognize who you really are? How can you recognize those gifts and skills? And how can you find your people if you can't find yourself? Right? And there can be an intense loneliness for these souls and kind of just this desire for connection that they haven't been able to find here. And a lot of that has to do with this, that this desire is actually for your own self that hasn't been able to land. Now, some of this has to do with, like we talked about, the energies not being able to host you in the bigger truth of who you are when you came to the earth. Then there's also energies around being persecuted in past lives for these very gifts and skills you can't receive right now. So say that you were targeted for your light, your healing, the energies you were trying to bring to the planet, and then part of you said, never again. Right? But in order to complete our evolutionary experience here on Earth, we've got to fully embody. So I've seen this again and again where working with souls and particularly looking at astrology charts where it's like, okay, so you could complete your karma here. You know, that's you can complete your karma in this lifetime. Like you put a lot on your plate to complete your kind of necessary part for your own evolution to be here and clear all the ties and break all the contracts, right? But these souls have something greater here to do, and that's full expression of who they are. And often it was maybe 1 or 2 lifetimes in ancient times when you were actually able to come close to that full expression before you were targeted as a light worker soul. And so we've got a lot to undo in this one lifetime, undo all these other lifetimes to uncover, figure out who we are and claim that back and embody it. But because of not just Venus and Taurus right now at home, but all the other astrology is saying, it's time. And so we can use this Venus and Taurus energy to be more conscious of these issues and invite our soul home. And this is a big part of the work that happens in the intuitive healing sessions. If you are interested in working with me individually, soul retrieval is a big part of this. Like going to a past life where part of your soul might be stuck there because of what happened to you. And calling that soul home, breaking the contracts, looking at who you really are and inviting that part of you home that you haven't been able to receive. Now, what happens is that because these souls are so dedicated and devoted and so in love with the earth and so can see it deep inside of you, even if you can't quite access it, you've got the codes, the DNA codes of the ultimate expression of this earth evolution, the 5D earth or the Eden star that our earth is. So you hold these codes, and that's what got you here. That's what allowed you to squeeze yourself into this lower dimensional frequency to be here right now. And yet we've kind of gotten trapped here and completely disconnected from that truth, bigger truth of who we are. And yet those codes are still there. They might be covered, hidden up, disconnected, but can't get rid of them. And so as we land home, we activate these codes. But it's such an interesting dichotomy because these souls feel such a dedication and devotion and a love for this earth, the planet, the potential of what this earth wants to be and humanity moving together with this earth into the new age. And yet often feel so unwelcome here and not at home. And disconnected from the people around you. Now, this is a pretty deliberate program we've bought into that has to do with the fact that there is a lot of power of these souls coming together to find each other. These souls embodying, and when you meet a soul mate, a soul brother or sister from your soul group, that person is going to reflect back to you who you really are. And if you can't receive who you really are, you don't know who you really are, then you'll probably reject that relationship and that experience. And yet we need to come together for this embodiment to truly happen. And one of the things that came through the Edgar Cayce readings was talking about how in the past through our evolution, we've had one master, say the Buddha or Christ, showing us what's possible in spiritual ascension, and that spiritual ascension energy in this time that we live in is happening in groups. So it makes sense that there's a lot of programming and interference energy with these soul groups finding their members. But it starts with us each individually being able to receive this bigger self. And I've helped people so many times this process of inviting in this bigger self, this more true part of themselves. And it's quite a process. It can be quite traumatic in a way, because everything that you built your life on doesn't maybe quite fit that, because you had no idea who you really were. And so you've got to go through this ego death process and everything falling away in your life. And this kind of like, I don't know who I am. And then how do I function in this world? But this is a kind of a necessary place along the journey, recognizing that we're not who we're told we were. Now, these souls over lifetimes have had a lot of times people around them, karmic groups, not your soul group, but like karmic groups around you, that they're very, not them necessarily knowing intellectually, but operating in an agenda very deliberately to keep you from knowing who you are. Because you're here to be on the cutting edge. You have the codes. You're here to move the earth into its evolution, next stage, right? So it's kind of like a very deliberate energy where the people around you wanted to constantly distract you from who you really are and your greater purpose. Kind of like, oh, put your attention over here. Put your attention on the physical. And of course, then there's the trauma programming. And all of this has been these deliberate designs, to keep you from connecting to who you really are. And so we can find that pattern of what we thought was love and care was actually more control energy. And then we have to completely rework our whole reality around and reprogram around what is love and what is care, and how do we receive that into our lives. And that's the energy of your true soul group that's been together from the beginning of time. You guys are all working on similar issues, and when you meet each other, it's like a genuine care and love. You want to lift each other up, not compete and tear each other down, and you want to see the best for the other person. So it's a very different energy, and we have to kind of figure out how to allow that into our lives. And that's this energy of Venus at home in Taurus this March 2020, with everything else going on. And so what's happened with these souls as they have incarnated into these deepest, darkest times, which very much resonates with the Piscean age, the dark ages. And what's happened is that we've gotten attached and programmed on such a deep level, a cellular level, of these trauma stories, that these soul groups have kind of are like carrying, almost it's like a distraction from those true DNA codes, light codes of the earth is trauma. Right? And that's all you can experience. And this might explain why you're like, how can these people just go live their life? And it doesn't seem like it's such a big of a deal. And for me, it's like I'm carrying around these big boulders and this energy. It's like this constant, and there's a lot of, multiple levels to that type of experience, like feelings of responsibility to the earth, because if you are the soul that has like dedicated and devoted and sacrificed to be here, then of course you're going to have responsibility contracts and a feeling like it's your fault that the earth has fallen off its path of evolution, but maybe it hasn't. Yes, we've been stuck here for thousands of years since Atlantean time, trying to move past this point, but maybe that means we're doing it in a very different way. And now is finally the time. But we've got a lot of stuff to unravel. And some of this has to do with this cellular level programming of trauma. It's all we know on some level, and it's what we keep creating. It's what makes us feel safe even on the earth, which is very mixed up, and yet it's true. And so we've got a lot of reprogramming to do, because what happens is that we carry a record of our past life physical body and our past life emotional body, what's happened to us in our current bodies. And so we've got to reprogram those traumas. And what's happened is that these light worker souls have been targeted. They've been perhaps persecuted, killed for who they are, rejected, exiled. And it's like we're just like on a cellular level living these truths, not understanding why our life is so hard. And so we've got to completely reevaluate these deep cellular patterns, which often are difficult to find, which is why often these souls have created deep trauma in early childhood, almost as a way to like pull these patterns out by their roots. Not easy. And yet perhaps there's a bigger path and purpose to all that we've gone through to fully own our permission to be the light workers that we are. Now, this is an interesting energy because here you are saying, coming to the earth, going through all you've gone through to bring your light and to bring your healing and this love for humanity and for the earth. And then you get here and they're like, we don't want you. What are you doing here? You know, and this feeling deep in the soul level of rejection that will repeat again and again in the life of these souls. And part of this has to do with the fact that the control energies don't want you here because they want to keep everybody in fear and darkness so that the evolution can't continue, so that they can continue to feed on us, right? And there's also this energy of like, if you're going to bring the light, that's going to light up the shadow. And if people, you can see this typically will often happen in these souls' lives in their day-to-day life too, where you'll in a situation or maybe around your family or friends where you illuminate some shadows. You don't even mean to, but just who you are and the spiritual work that you're trying to do and being present and clearing, and that light comes in and lights up their shadow. If they don't want to look at that shadow and they're not ready to look at that shadow, they're going to blame you. You know, and that's what I call team scapegoat. That's often what's happened to these souls. And so that is a very difficult energy because these sensitive, very sensitive souls take that personally, you know, a personal rejection. And yet it's just kind of part of the program here. You know, it's part of the whole story, bigger story. And maybe this landing home to the earth opportunity that we're having in March 2020 is about kind of disidentifying with those stories and stopping to take it personally and understand, well, that of course, anybody who's trying to bring the light into the darkness may be revealing lies, and, you know, or corruption, maybe in past lives that you didn't even know you were revealing. And then, of course, you're going to be targeted. That targeting, that rejection, that exile, that persecution, whatever you've gone through in past lives, then exists on a cellular level. That's kind of part of the agenda to keep us creating trauma because we're powerful creator souls, projector souls, you know? And so, of course, those projector souls are going to be targeted with trauma programming, so we keep creating trauma. And yet these systems are falling apart. And yet it's like, that's a beautiful thing. And the light's coming in and the lower matrix is being dismantled. But these souls are feeling like they don't know what's up from down or left from right, or even like their very next move, you know, or how to just deal with everyday life becomes really overwhelming because of all these spiritual changes that are trying to happen that are so incredibly positive. But of course, there's not a lot of support for these energies. And if nobody around you, you don't have any of your soul group members around you, there's no validation for what you're going through. And you might think you're just going insane, you know, which is very common. And yet this is a time to move through all of these stories, reprogram that trauma programming and receive back. Now, if you've been persecuted and targeted for your light, your healing, your gifts, then you're going to reject them. Right? And this is part of that, again, Venus and Taurus saying, can we receive? You know, because so what happens is that, can we receive ourself back? First, we got to recognize ourselves. We got to feel worthy of our bigger self. You know, all these stories, you know, where you brought the light in and then all of a sudden they made you the devil. And then a lot of times these trauma stories are, I see in past lives that they're kind of like hooked into our psyche, in that programming on a DNA level because it's a strange thing, but it has to do with a public death. And if you were killed publicly, and a lot of times you had a lot of sympathy and you had antipathy, right? So in order to pull that off, to kill you publicly, they had to turn people against you. And then that mob mentality is like throwing all this hatred at you. And then part of the group is like sympathetic, like, oh my gosh, our healer is, and we can't save her or him, you know, and our teacher is like being persecuted and just this deep despair. And you take all that in as a soul. Because all those energies going at you, looking at you, it's like directed energy. And then your soul takes it in and it's like, okay, well, first of all, I failed my people, and I failed my mission, and I might be the darkness after all. And how could God let this happen to me? So I must not be God or good enough for God. So it's like, that's how this illusion of separation and the fall into the lower evolution of humanity happen for these souls. And that has, it's just one of the factors that has to do with this type of dynamic. And yet right now, it's really important that we disidentify with all of these patterns, reprogram on a cellular level those trauma responses, that trauma programming. And of course, for true healing to occur, there needs to be a presentation of the symptoms as they release. And so that's why so many of these souls are being triggered into old trauma patterns or new trauma that's triggering old trauma patterns. And it's a difficult place to be, especially with no validation for what's happening to you, no people around you that can support or understand what you're going through, and yet it's kind of part of the deal, because in order to receive back our group, we've got to be able to feel worthy of receiving back who we really are. So on March 6th, Venus moved into Taurus, and Venus will stay in Taurus until April 3rd. And now, like I said, this happens every year, but this year in particular, because of all the other astrology, Mercury retrograde going 3 times over that Pisces Aquarius cusp, saying it is time to move into the Aquarian age, right? So what's really going on is that, like how we talked about when you incarnated in this lifetime and probably a series of lifetimes, the earth energies couldn't support you in your bigger true star self, right? And so only part of you could come in. So you're like half in, half out, trying to function here, and also feeling like you need to heal the planet. And it's quite a big task for somebody who's not even incarnated all the way, and it's like you're operating on partial cylinders, kind of hopping along, trying to just get through life, and not able, like frustrated and confused as to why the people around you don't seem to have these problems, right? It's because they don't have this big mission. They're in a different place in their evolution, and their unconscious part of them and the karmic situations, have them in your life to kind of constantly negate, distract, and invalidate who you are in your bigger soul purpose. It's by design, and it hurts, but we can't get stuck in that hurt right now. We have to disidentify from those patterns and say, oh, okay, so that's a part of this story, but that's just a story. And the bigger part of your soul is a truth, and gone through all these stories in past lives and gotten stuck in these old stories. That's that need for soul retrieval, but that's not who you are. And so this is a huge shift that's available right now. And so on just after Venus comes into Taurus on the 8th, it comes into a conjunction with Uranus at 3 degrees. Now, this is part of why this year Venus and Taurus is so potent, because Uranus is here now fully coming into because Taurus represents the physical body. It represents everything that we need to live our life. Where Aries is like the first sign of the zodiac, it's the spark of spring. It's like the new incarnation. It's that kind of conception and beginning, the sprout of the seed, right? And then Taurus is like the plant coming into form, right? And everything that's needed for that plant to thrive. And of course, if we look at it from these souls' perspective and their journey to try to embody on planet Earth, there's a lot of interfering, So this is the stories and the energies that have happened over lifetimes. It's very low self-worth, and not being able to have what you need to just simply survive. Because if you had what you needed to survive, then maybe you'd come into your spiritual path and purpose, and that would be a great threat to the control energies, right? So there's just like so much trying to dismantle and reprogram right now, but it is a very potent and powerful time to have big shifts in this core level of self-worth, because Venus and Uranus coming together around this full moon in Virgo is like a pure energy. Virgo has a purification energy, and so this full moon is kind of like a great energy to purify, because it's opposite. It's for that full moon, it's opposite the Sun and Neptune. And speaking of the Piscean age and who we were in the Piscean age and who we need to be, what might we be in the Aquarian age, and how do we make that shift, right? Because Uranus represents higher frequency vibrations. In Taurus, it's about embodying in the earth, in our bodies, maybe landing home, these souls, to the earth right here, right now. So they come, when Venus and Uranus coming together, is a huge kind of ringing of a bell, kind of inviting your soul home, inviting this bigger truth of you home to the earth, and clearing out everything that's in the way of that, particularly that trauma programming. And it's interesting because on the day of the full moon, on the 9th, Venus and Uranus moved together. They both moved to 4 degrees Taurus. And that puts them in exact sextile with the North Node and exact trine with the South Node. And so this is telling us now, this is kind of why all of these pieces together, it's not just Venus and Taurus, but it's Venus and Uranus and their connection to the nodes, and Mercury retrograde and the sun together in Pisces across from the full moon. And so this is kind of, it's like an activation of some positive energies that can help us land home to the earth finally. We might not even realize that we weren't even here because we don't know who we are, except we know that our life has been really kind of limping along. And so that sextile, and now it's interesting because Venus and Uranus together will come into that sextile with the North Node, trine to the South Node. But Uranus, for the good part of March, stays in exact sextile to the North Node and trine to the South Node. So it's like this energy of Venus and Uranus coming together, activating our self-worth. Uranus brings radical change, radical vibrational change, and kind of jolts us. It was discovered at the time of electricity, so it's like jolts us into a new energy. And so Venus and Taurus, and Uranus coming together in Taurus is like a radical, an opportunity for a radical shift in our self-worth. And for these souls, that has a deeper meaning of our self-worth for who we really are, our self-worth for being home on planet Earth. So Venus coming home to Taurus with all this other stuff going on is speaking to this. And then for a big part of March, Uranus will be in that exact sextile and trine to the South Node, keeping this energy going. And so the North Node is in just having next month at the end of April, it moves into Gemini. And so we just have just over a month left of the North Node in Cancer. And it's like, we're kind of feeling a little pressure around getting the messages. Of course, Cancer is nurturing, mothering, compassion, home, safety, security, love. And so see how that fits in, right? Because it's like, okay, how do we receive these new energies? How do we receive our soul? How do we receive the new age? And then it's like, how can we do that if we don't feel worthy of who we are? Right? Because when you were persecuted in these past lives, you kind of bought into this thing of like, oh, I failed, I'm not good enough, God doesn't love me. Like all of this stuff was deliberate by design to keep you disempowered and disconnected from that true path and purpose. So it's like a massive overhaul on this cellular level, releasing trauma, releasing low self-worth, and so we can receive. And it's like almost this whole Taurus activation and Venus activation has to happen in order for us to really receive the messages of the North Node in Cancer. And so that Uranus in exact sextile, this is about creative solutions. And it's like, okay, what needs to happen? We're jimmying the lock to get into this new Aquarian age. And we've got to like a little bit more nurturing, a little bit more self-worth, a little more embodying, and just kind of working it, And then trying the South Node, saying harmonizing the stuff from the past that's keeping us from moving forward. The South Node in Capricorn, what's been holding us back, authority contracts, right? So this inability to receive who we are, the trauma programming, we failed God, we failed the earth, like all this stuff, all is tied into buying into that there's something outside of ourselves more powerful than who we are, which is a lie. And yet we've all bought into it. It's part of the Piscean age, and it's an interesting, this relationship between all these planets in Capricorn. And now the sun, for during this time, the sun's in Pisces, and exactly conjunct Neptune for that Virgo full moon, and speaking to the dark, shadowy lies of the Piscean age, what have everything to do with authority structures and contracts in our life, where we bought into that there's something more powerful outside of ourselves, and how the earth has bought into, or just our whole evolution has bought, it's given our power away again and again. So these authority contracts play a big role in this whole picture and on the table, because during this whole time we've got Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and the South Node still in Capricorn, a full stellium of energies. And so that's really interesting. And then so that full moon in Virgo is kind of like ringing a bell of a freedom, of like we can purify, we can release the goddess from her chains and release the feminine, because a lot of times, even though you might have been in a male body, often persecuted for spiritual reasons and being a healer, but the healer part of you is often associated with the feminine part of each of us. We all have feminine and masculine within. We've all incarnated in male and female bodies. And so the healer part of us is kind of the feminine part. And so Venus representing this, our values, our self-worth, is going to be very much affected by these situations that may have happened to us in past lives. Now, just right after, about 12 hours into the next day after that full moon in Virgo on the 9th, on the 10th, Mercury turns direct. So there's a huge energy because it's in Aquarius, and that turning direct, it's like new direction, new energy, like let's go. Let's go. We have spent so long stuck in these places, right? And so really good energy for this embodiment. And then, so Mercury will spend like the 10th to the 17th still in Aquarius. And then on the 17th, which is interesting, St. Patrick's Day, just kind of tying into all of this like persecution of the feminine and the healers, moves back into Pisces. But Mercury will be moving, right? So by the time it gets back into Pisces, it's got momentum again. So it's going to be different than the retrograde part in Pisces that was like really soupy and really confusing and really spinning around in the fishes going in circles and stuff. And so this is going to be a little different. It's more directed, and Mercury's ready to go. And so kind of moving right through that Pisces and giving us the revelations and spiritual connection that can come from the Pisces energy and the positive aspects of Pisces. But that third pass over that Aquarius Pisces cusp, very potent right there around the 17th of March. Now, that's right about when right in the middle of March is about when we start to feel the Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, massive divine masculine activation. That is a whole nother story. Check out my equinox video for that. And about from the 20th to the 25th is the peak of that energy of Mars, Jupiter, and Pluto all coming together in Capricorn at 24 degrees. And that leads right to the new moon. So the equinox happens on the 20th and then that's when the sun moves into Aries, so it's like a fresh, brand new start for our whole solar year. And then on the 24th is the new moon in Aries. And so that's very, very powerful energy there. And we'll still be feeling that Mars, Jupiter, Pluto explosion of who knows what energies there. But it's like Aries fire, and the fire of the South. See, now that's another thing that's going on with all of this, and why this Venus at home in Taurus is such a powerful activation for us around our self-worth of receiving who we really are to land home completely on Earth, has to do with Chiron and Aries. And Chiron and Aries is right next to Black Moon Lilith, the darkest, shadowy places, particularly associated with the feminine, with the healing, with the intuition, with the emotion, with the compassion, and the distortions of the feminine. And how the moon herself and the energies of the feminine have been kept in chains and persecuted and kept in that low self-worth, right? Now, this whole time, so we've got Chiron and Aries, but it's speaking to Chiron, our deepest wounds in the self. And so the wounds around Chiron and Aries is it's like, do you have permission to be who you really are on planet Earth, fully embodied, right? And that's the deal, is that these souls that we've been talking about have been partially incarnated. And it's like, okay, well, I can stay safe on the earth as long as I'm exiled, or I pretend I'm not who I am, or I reject my bigger healer self and I just get along with everybody else and just kind of try to fit in, right? And then it's like deep wounds of the soul of where you haven't been able to be who you are. And it's like Aries is like, it's like just the fighting for the true self and fighting for freedom. And so it's a really powerful energy to have the sun move in and then the moon join up for that new moon on the 24th, right when Mars and Jupiter and Pluto all together in Capricorn. And so it's like super powerful and fiery. And so the new moon and the sun will be coming into a conjunction with Black Moon Lilith and Chiron, who are in exact square to the nodes of the moon. Meaning like square to the nodes is like square to both the north node and the south node. And that's at crossroads things like you can't go any further, right? Until you resolve these issues of the past. You're stuck. You cannot continue down this road. And that means that all those shadowy places of the dark moon, the dark side of the moon, the darkest emotional places, the deep hidden secrets in our psyche and in the collective have got to move, and the light is coming on them. And Aries, it's like really fits these souls ready to fight for who they really are. And ready to break the chains of the authority contracts of that Capricorn South Node and come into their full embodiment here and being like, okay, so these control energies are like lower dimensional. They might be higher dimensional from where we are right now, but they're lower dimensional to where we came from. And we've given our power over to them. It's like, oh, maybe this could be like teachers from past lives. And it's like, oh, please tell me when I'm ready for initiation. Did I pass the test? Am I good enough? And it's like, these people, first of all, they're not even truly human a lot of times. And they're like, they might be fourth or fifth dimensional beings, but they're not where you came from in the higher dimensions. And it's like, why would you let them decide when you're ready for your embodiment, right? But it's part of this whole Earth evolution trap. In order to get here, it's part of what we had to go through to get here, to squeeze into this lower dimension, was to kind of agree and, make a contract, basically, kind of sell our soul a little bit. It's like, oh, they couldn't stop us from coming, but they could say, don't you dare. You're not allowed to activate into your higher power and who you really are. And then if we ever tried to, like those past lives where we were persecuted, we'd get beaten down and punished. And we just bought into that, right? And this is a crazy thing. It's like these souls are allowing themselves to be punished through these authority contracts, deep subconscious stuff, for who they are and their gifts. And yet they're not even embodying their gifts. It's like, why are you letting yourself be punished for something you're not even enjoying? And then the spiritual initiation thing, it's like you were a full initiate. In order to get here as a light worker, you were fully purified, full initiate. You've gone through spiritual ascension numerous times in other evolutions, maybe not in this way particularly, but you've got these codes, And so giving your power over to these authority energies, saying that they get to decide whether you're good enough to become an initiate, and you were a full initiate before you came here. It's pretty ridiculous, and yet we've all bought into it. And so this is what's on the table right now. And it's so potent and powerful this time. And it's particularly potent. Okay, so right around the middle of March is when we start feeling the Mars, Jupiter, Pluto. And then on the 17th, Mercury moves back into Pisces. And that third pass over that Aquarian Pisces, it's like, okay, we got to move, to the Aquarian age. We're turning towards the future. And that requires a lot of reprogramming of all the stuff we've talked about, right? And for these souls that are the most deeply traumatized, they're the ones that are on the cutting edge of ascension. And that's part of the message that's coming through here. It's like this deep gratitude for all you've gone through to be here right now. And the energies are changing on the earth finally to be able to host you in your bigger part of who you are. And it's time to come home and incarnate, even though that process is a little traumatic a lot of times. And because it's highlighting all those trauma programming, because you can't come into your body if you're going to hold on to this cellular trauma belief system. And but there's this energy of like, who you are, being present, breathing in a body on planet Earth, have been a part of these shifting energies, whether you know it or not. Just by existing as who you are, you have been supporting this shift. And there's just this, like, I go through times in this work where I just get waves of this energy of massive gratitude from the earth and from higher forces, that are supporting our evolution, our higher self, basically, our highest selves, saying, thank God you're here. And thank you so much for going through everything you've gone through. And it's intense and it's a lot. And you're on the ground in the front lines of this battle. That's because you are on the cutting edge of this spiritual evolution. And so it's time to get into gear and get out of victim and get out of those stories of the Piscean age and start enjoying this process. There's a lot of joy. Aries is like this childlike joy and freshness of way of looking at life. And it's kind of like we kind of bought in the Piscean age that our role here as light workers was to be a martyr and to be in trauma and to be persecuted. Like that was how we sacrifice for humanity. And then it's like we got to rewrite all of these distortions of the Piscean age, which are distortions associated with Christ consciousness. Because it is time for the Christ consciousness to fully embody here on earth. And that's what we're doing in our soul groups. So it's a powerful energy happening with all of these factors together. And speaking to that Chiron in Aries, it's like this fight for the true self and your permission to be who you really are, fully embodied, not compromising in order to survive, right? Because Aries is this survival energy. Like, do you deserve to exist? Taurus is, do you deserve to have what you need to survive? And Aries is like, do you deserve to even survive? Right? And that'd be enough to keep you kind of partially here, kind of waiting around for them to come for you. And yet they didn't come for you this time. So what do you do with yourself? And that's how deep on a cellular level, a lot of these souls feel, and they don't quite know what to do here, still trapped into those old trauma stories and not able to function, and yet not able to get the heck out of here either. And that's the story. It's like, well, we can't complete this evolution until we fully arrive. And the time is now. Complete our karma, our karmic energy of why we need to keep coming into a body here. So it's not that you wouldn't come back to the earth in a body, but not out of your karmic need to clear contracts and stuff like that. It'd just be out of service. And so that's kind of the shift that we're looking at here. And so many souls I work with have this. Like, you can see it in their birth chart. They have a shit ton of stuff they put on their plate to deal with to complete their karma. And yet that's not enough, because they can't leave here and feel good about this experience or complete this experience until they have a full expression of who they are. And yet they have no idea who they are, because they've been completely disconnected from who they are because of these trauma stories and patterns. So it's all on the table right now. And then at the end of the month, on the 28th, Venus comes into a sweet trine with Jupiter. So we've had this Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, equinox, new moon in Aries, And then we've got on the 28th, Venus trine Jupiter. And then on the 29th, Venus trine Pluto. And so that's like a really sweet energy. And it's like a bookend with the beginning of Venus experience in Taurus. It's about Venus and Uranus conjunction and sextile, the north node trine the south node, very sweet. And then at the end of her experience, that sweet trine with Jupiter and Pluto on the 28th and 29th. And then, right at this time, actually, right at that full new moon in Aries that happens on the 24th, that's right about the time that Saturn is moving into Aquarius. right? So all of this is like, oh yeah, no, this is, now Saturn only makes it to 1 degree this year before it turns retrograde, but it's like he's dipping his feet into the water, you know, and kind of being like, hey, you guys, I think we could do it a different way. We don't need to stay in the trauma of the Piscean age. And it's like a whole new perspective, whole new kind of ground under our feet, potentially, if we can receive it. You can see how all these things coming together, that North Node in Cancer and Chiron and Black Moon Lilith in Aries square the nodes, and Mercury retrograde going over the Aquarius Pisces cusp, and Venus Taurus sextile the North Node. You know, it's just like everywhere. It's like everybody's in agreement of what we're trying to do right now. And are we going to get on the page? You know? And so pretty powerful that Saturn moves into Aquarius, and then Venus will come into a trine with Saturn on April 4th, you know, right actually as it moves in. So Saturn will be at 0 degrees Aquarius. And so on the day that April 3rd, 4th, when Venus moves over into Gemini, it will trine Saturn, you know, so that's kind of like ding, ding, ding. These are like little bells ringing and ringing in this new age. And it's subtle. And yet there's just everybody in this whole, all the planets and the nodes and Black Moon Lilith are on board with like, okay, you guys, let's stop messing around, you know? And it's cool because it's like for the last 3-4 years, we've been in this place of like 1 foot in the old paradigm, 1 foot in the new paradigm. And of course, it's a long transition into the Aquarian age, but this is a big turning point, and the planets are telling us. And then of course, this whole year has this energy as Jupiter comes into that connection with Pluto, and again in November and December, and again this summer. And then in December, Saturn and Jupiter together move over into Aquarius. December 2020, there's a potent and powerful solar eclipse that happens, and total solar eclipse. And so everything's saying it is indeed time to turn to the future and move. And so this month of March is so potent and powerful for this incredibly, all these levels of healing and clearing. And I wanted to just speak to you about this, that we are being asked to let go of all those stories and fully embody and land home on the earth in the bigger truth of who we are. And so I look forward to seeing you on the ongoing daily updates. I hope you could consider joining me for the soul group session that's happening on it's the exact time of, or just before the exact time of the equinox. And that happens on the 19th in my time zone. So the 19th at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and on March 19th. So I hope you'll consider joining that soul group session, a group intuitive session where we can look at shared past life pictures and, you know, get the support we need for this embodiment that's trying to that we're being urged to do right here, right now, which means releasing everything we thought was true about us and all the structures of our life, because they all represented that false part of us that we bought into. And it's free fall, but it's also very exciting. And so I look forward to seeing you throughout this powerful month of March, and hopefully for that soul group session. Until then, I'm Adrienne Elise. Namaste.